Good afternoon and welcome to the first collaboration of the Women in Leadership Student Organization and Decision Making Voices from the Field. My name is Charlotte Reardon and I'm a second-year student in the Health Policy and Management program and the co-founder of the Women in Leadership Student Group. We are delighted to have Dr. Swati Piramal with us today as an exceptional example of a female leader in healthcare. Dr. Swati Piramal is one of India's leading scientists and industrialists. Her involvement in healthcare focuses on public health innovation. She currently serves as the director of the Piramal Healthcare, a leading drug discovery company which provides affordable medicines to the masses to reduce the global burden of disease. As director, she leads a team of scientists in cancer, diabetes, inflammation, and infectious disease. In addition, she serves as the director of the Piramal Foundation, whose aim is to promote health in rural India by supporting women's empowerment projects, community education that creates young leaders, and also provides a mobile health service to the community. Dr. Piramal has received numerous awards, including the Ravi Gandhi Award for Outstanding Woman Achiever and one of France's highest honors, the Knight of the Order of Merit. In addition, she was named the BMA Management Woman Achiever of the Year and was nominated 3 years in a row as one of the 25 most powerful women in India. Dr. Piramal earned her medical degree from the University of Bombay and her master's in public health from the Harvard School of Public Health. She currently serves on the Dean's Advisory Board of both the Harvard School of Public Health and the Harvard Business School. Please join me today in welcoming Dr. Swati Piramal as she talks on the paradigm of leadership, a woman's view. With that, I'll turn the session over to Dean Frank.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Swati Piramal back to the Harvard School of Public Health, where she spent quite a bit of time as a student with us and now has been serving on the board of Dean's Advisors. As you know, the Voices from the Field program, it's meant to bring to the school people who've been out there in the field and to try and understand, especially for our students, how is it that very successful leaders make decisions? What are the decisions they have made? How have they made those decisions, and how have those generated lessons that we're trying now to disseminate to our students? And we're delighted that we have this collaboration and the emphasis on women in leadership. In that respect, our numbers at the Harvard School of Public Health are very positive. Let me tell you, I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that when Dr. Gro Harlem Brundtland graduated from this school in 1965, the graduating class was 72 people, and only 18% were women. By 1992, when Swati Piramal graduated, we had 258 graduates, and 51% were women. In fact, that was the year, for the first time in the history of the school, that we had a majority of women in the graduating class. And do you know who was the student speaker at commencement? It was Swati Piramal. So that was an emblematic year. It was the first time. Last year, we went all the way to 514 graduates, and 61% were women. So we're on the right trajectory, and the future of public health, I think, is really assured. I just led a dean's trip to India, the highlight of which was the visit in Mumbai to Swati, and where we saw on the ground all of her accomplishments as a leader, both in science and in industry. And so we've had a chance to really see in the field what she has accomplished. We believe that, for our graduating school students, now with this majority of women, but for everyone, men and women, she represents a fantastic role model of some of our students who really go out and make a huge difference in the world. So to kick things off, I'd like to ask you, Swati, to tell us a little bit about some of the crucial decisions that you have made, and what are the lessons that you can share with us.
Thank you, Julio. It's wonderful to be back home. I feel very familiar, I feel very comfortable because it's a place where I spent so much time. So I want to start by telling you what happened when I was a student. When I went back home, I saw this little girl who was about 4 years old. She was walking on the road in Mumbai, in the mill area of Mumbai, and she was paralyzed from waist below, actually. And she couldn't run, she was on crutches, and I just thought it was the most horrible sight that I had ever seen. And I had studied public health, but I didn't really know how to use it. But when I went back and I said, we can change things, I started to do skits with friends and to explain that there was no demon inside, and that's why this little child got paralysis. It was polio. But polio, people didn't understand what it was. It was a virus. And I explained all that, and I started a no polio zone in a 10-kilometer radius from the center. And every year there were 35,000 children who were paralyzed who would come there. And as I began to do this immunization program in Mumbai, because it was full of migrant workers, it changed. And 10 years later, I did not need this facility anymore, so I closed it down because we were so successful at prevention. It was my first lesson that even a young student can make a difference. I didn't know that before. I studied the theory, but I didn't know that one could actually act on it. And then I realized that India was suffering from a triple whammy. And that meant, we always thought that it had tuberculosis, malaria, infectious disease. We've all heard of that. And sure, that is our biggest problem. But at that time, when I was at the School of Public Health, I first began to see the glimmerings of chronic disease. And Lillian Chung, who's a professor at that time, she was a lecturer, I used to sit outside her office and said, I'm writing about chronic disease. And she would say, well, no one would believe you that there was chronic disease in India. Why would they get heart disease? Or why would they get diabetes? It's a very poor population. But that was the second problem, that the chronic disease was rising and rising rapidly. As we moved from being a poverty-stricken nation to one which had the Coca-Cola gene, people actually began to have more Coke and more sugar and more meat and everything. And so chronic disease really rose rapidly. And now we have the triple whammy is the new emerging diseases of resistant tuberculosis, of bird flu, wiping out large populations of poultry workers and so on. So in every single indicator that we have on health, we must be at the bottom of the barrel. And so when the dean came this visit to Delhi, the folder had lots of negative information about how low we were on infant mortality, maternal mortality, chronic disease, diabetes numbers, you name it. And I kind of cringed in my seat and I said, oh. And then I thought, oh, you know, isn't it nice that I can wake up every morning that there's so much to be done? And so that kind of gave me a lot of hope. And I think what is the other thing which gives me a lot of hope in the morass of the lack of leadership that every nation on earth is facing. Political leadership, political will, the importance of not tackling big problems till they actually come to your throat, and so on. I mean, the bird flu was a very good example of how paralyzed everybody was. And so when I think about this morass, and I think that people ask me, is India really going to do well? They've all heard about the economic problems and all that. And I think that to myself, that within a morass of depression, despair, if you can organize an institution or a company or people who do things well, who are in search of excellence, who do whatever they can with the highest standards of ethics, I think you can shine in that dark days of despair and really create a world-class place. And that to me was something that my husband and I started in 1988. We took over a little pharmaceutical company called Nicholas Laboratories. I had no idea about management. I had no idea how to read a balance sheet. I didn't know about marketing. And here I was a physician trained in medicine, but I had no idea. So I came to the School of Public Health. I went to a class which said healthcare management, and I thought, oh, I would get everything that I wanted to know. It didn't happen quite that way, and I had to go out and reach out and cobble together my own program, where I studied at the Kennedy School, I studied regulation. At the business school, I studied marketing, information technology, finance, basic finance. I studied communication, and I went back home with all this under my belt. And how could I use it? I used every single class that I studied here. I studied about communication. I think we became one of the best communicators as a business in healthcare. We studied marketing. And if I look back and I say, okay, what did all this result in? When we bought the company, it was around 20 million rupees, I would say. And we sold part of it last year, 2 years ago, to Abbott for $3.8 billion. So it was 40% of our business which we sold. So we can create economic value, and we can create economic value with values, with ethics, with high standards of scientific excellence, and of commercializing science in a very positive way so it benefits mankind. And I thought those lessons were so important for me that I could hold up my head and say that we never bribed anybody, we never paid anyone under the table, but we created this idea that doctors who came to us and bought our products, that every single one of them was assured of quality, that it had science behind it. And it was that kind of a network that I created. And when Abbott bought our company, one of the things that they said was, can we use the name Piramal? And I said, well, you know, usually multinationals come to India and they want their name on everything. And this was unusual. I said, you know, why are you doing that? He says, because you created this idea of science that people really respect and your customers really want to have more of. So eventually we didn't give them the name because we still had a long way to go to do more in the area of science. So that was my first idea that I could actually help to change public policy. Then I became the president of the Chamber of Commerce. I was the first woman in 90 years. It's a very male-dominated Chamber of Commerce, but they let me become, I don't know whether it was a mistake, but anyway, they let me do that. And I had to go to the Reserve Bank of India. They were talking about finance and CRR ratios and all kinds of jargon, which I had no training. But I read 1,000 pages of banking before I went into that room. And then I said, I must play to whatever I know best. So when the governor of the Reserve Bank asked you, what do you think of the economy? I said, sir, well, whatever. I gave all the numbers, but I said, you know, I have to tell you something, that hospitals today are not known as infrastructure. They're known as real estate. And therefore, banks can't lend to it. And you know what? We have no new hospitals, which are serving the vast majority of our country for years and years. And they said, is it really? I said, well, yeah, have a look at it. And they changed the law that year so that it became an infrastructure. And then large number of new hospitals came up. So I said, wow, you had an impact on public policy. And I realized that you could change things. And I didn't know then. But all these lessons in life were about having a really large impact. So I wanted to talk briefly about what values that we built the business on, that I kind of follow. And I think these are three. It's in Hindi, it's called Jnana, Karma, Bhakti. Jnana is knowledge, it's learning everything. And karma is action, is using that knowledge in application. And bhakti is the idea of devotion, but it's devotion to a higher purpose. It's devotion to a cause, devotion to people. In India, we have a beautiful word called seva, the idea of service. And I kind of founded everything, the way I worked, the way I did things, the way I led in these three buckets. And I'd like to explain a little story about each one of them. The idea of karma, about knowledge, you know, books are really important. There was a young man who was, he was a clerk in Chennai, near Chennai, about 50 years ago. And he was very devoted to learning in books. He would study books and he would really learn the science of mathematics. But he was extremely poor. So one day he wrote his theorems to scientists in Cambridge, and I said, these are really my theorems. And this man's name was Thomas Hardy. And he took his theorems and he read them and he said, oh, and he pushed them in the waste paper basket. But after a few minutes, he took it out again and he said, wow, these might be the answers to some things that we've been working on for years. And this man, he called him to Cambridge, and then he became a fellow of the Trinity College. His name was Srinivas Ramanujan. He was one of India's greatest scientists. So the lesson I learned from him was persevere despite the greatest odds. He was very poor, he was a clerk, but he had this vision. And really be very friendly with your books. Whenever you go to any meeting and you have read 1,000 pages, that's a secret. The other person has not read it for sure. And so when you can speak with authority, in so many meetings and sometimes with a lot of men, they don't expect me to be well read, right? So they don't know that I know so many things. So I would be able to quote the law, everything. And once they got so fed up with me, they threw me out of the whole association because they said, oh, you know, you really believe in Indian science, you believe in filing patents, and we don't agree with you. We think the best way to do is to copy things and then sell them at lower prices. So I said, no, I will be happily go out of the room, but this is why I think you have to believe in Indian science. And I'd really read up a lot about it. And I have to say in 10 years, they gradually began to change the spots. You know, the leopard began to change the spots. So be with knowledge, that's the idea of jnana. The idea of karma is about action. And there is a beautiful story in a Bhagavad Gita, which is 3,500 years old. And it is a story of Prince Arjun, who really fought the war against a battle of a mighty force. And on the other side were all his family members. It was a fratricidal war. His name was Arjun, and he took his bow, began to shoot, and then he said, life is too difficult. And he put his bow down and refused to fight. And then Lord Krishna came and told him, no, pick up your bow and fight for dharma, fight for the right, fight for what you believe in, because action is very important. The results are not that important, but action is. And I think for women, that's a very important lesson, because we often have to juggle between home and children, raising children, and work. And very often we don't go out to try to change the world because we believe we can't. Life is too difficult, we can't do things, no one will believe us. We really can't go and make that action. But I think that that's where you have to take that step, move forward with that bow and arrow and try to shoot for that highest vision, I would say. So we learned about karma. And lastly, about seva, the idea of service. And I think that is a very important value. Because today, to get this sense of community, and we learned this at Harvard School of Public Health more than anywhere else, this word, reduce the burden of disease, is something that I learned in my first class here at the school. It was at Mark Roberts was teaching an ethics class, yeah, and he was talking about QALYs and reduction of burden of disease. Well, for the last 10 years, I use this line every day. It's below the name of my company. It says, Piramal Healthcare, reducing the burden of disease. And everything that we do is we measure that. We measure how we can reduce it, what work can we do. 10 years ago, when I started drug discovery, they said to me, Indians cannot discover anything because they are not innovative. They love to copy. They have no innovation. They don't know how to file patents. They have no idea. And if they know how to file patents, no FDA will ever accept a dossier written by an Indian and really being done in India, the research. Well, it's all different now. For those 10 years, we climbed step by step. Today, I have 250 patents. I have 16 newly discovered drugs. They're working from cancer to diabetes. And last month, our first drug got approval in Europe. It was for regenerative medicine, which is a cutting-edge technology. So I had to believe in myself that we can do it, but everyone else said it can't be done. So even today, people say, you know, the stuff that you're doing, we are mining the Himalayan mountains, we are mining the oceans, we are mining the deserts of India to find bacteria and fungi, even going to the Antarctic, where you can go under the ice, find new bacteria, bring them back, clone them, and we are finding wonderful new drugs from that. And people say, well, you know, the Western pharma stopped all this years ago, so you aren't going to be successful. But when I was talking to some of the faculty and I said, is this a wrong approach? Do I sort of not believe in it? And I said to myself, I think there are a billion people of India who need health care, and they need affordable drugs. And if I do what they're doing is doing biologics, I'm going to land up with very expensive drugs, which my people will not be able to afford. And therefore, this idea of learning from Mother Nature is still very valid. So this idea of seva really encompasses, in a way, my life. I think that's what I wanted to really do. So jnana, karma, bhakti, for me, those three were very important. What I learned at the School of Public Health really helped me. I would like to end by reading a little poem which was written by a medieval poet, and it was translated by Rabindranath Tagore. And I feel when I read it that it gives me a lot of hope in life. He said, I salute the life, and she said, she was a lady, I salute the life which is like a sprouting seed, with its one arm upraised in the air and the other down in the soil, the life which is one in its outer form and its inner sap, the life that ever appears, yet ever eludes, the life that I come to salute, and the life that goes. I salute the life that is revealed and that is hidden. I salute the life in suspense, standing still like a mountain, and the life of the surging sea of fire, the life that is like a tender lotus, hard like a thunderbolt. I salute the life which is one of the mind, with its one side in the dark and the other side in the light. I salute the life in the house and the life abroad in the unknown, the life full of joy and the life weary with its pains, the life eternally moving, rocking the world into stillness, the life deep and silent, breaking out into roaring waves. So I like this idea of whatever we do at the School of Public Health, moving from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, and the idea of helping millions of people and touching the lives of many, many people around the world.
Thank you, Swati. That was truly amazing and inspirational. And it completely, I think you capture what I find very exciting about this school, which is the idea that we're truly mission driven, but exactly this question of going from knowledge to action. I mean, when you look around the world, that's probably our largest gap. I mean, we do so much less than what we know how to do. There's still so many deaths that are totally preventable with the knowledge we have now. And part of what we're trying to do with this series is exactly to try to close that gap and make sure that that the knowledge we have actually gets used, gets translated into action. But I was very, very much moved by the way you have broken away with some conventional wisdom. I mean, we tend to think that to do this knowledge action gap, and especially the third value of service, it's always in the public sector. And I have worked all my life there, and most of our graduates have. But I think what's amazing is that you have brought this ethic of service into a private sector setting. That's pretty unconventional, and I hope you could expand a little bit of how you see, because I do think that many of our graduates will increasingly find career paths outside of the more traditional channels of public service. And what you're saying is it's not public service in the narrow sense, it's service to the public.
That's right.
Which can happen from, say, a private company. The other thing that I thought was very interesting, and we'll open it to questions in a minute, is how you were also willing to break out of the conventional mode about India's role in the pharmaceutical world. And I remember when I met you first, I had just become dean, and I met you in Delhi, and I was struck when you told me that you had actually sold the generic part of your company to Abbott, and that you were going into the innovative and the research-based. It was a little bit like the world upside down, right? So now, the Indian company was selling to the multinational the generics, and they were moving into the research base. You already talked a little bit about the skepticism, but I like to ask you, how do you? I think the other element in the equation, in addition to knowledge, action, service, is courage. Where do you find the courage to actually challenge conventions in the way you have done?
Thank you, Julia. Indeed, I feel, just to your first question, it's very clear to me that the School of Public Health will not only be for the public sector, that it will breed a selection of young entrepreneurs who will go out and learn the management lessons, the lessons of commercialization of science, and really change the world. So I was struck when, of course, when I was a student, I kind of did it myself. I had no idea. No one told me how to do this stuff. Go and learn marketing at the School of Public Health, go and take a finance course, go and study regulatory environment at the Kennedy School. And I used to use the shuttle bus a lot, going round and round in circles. But I think the new curriculum or a new method could be to stimulate that kind of entrepreneurship. And the reason I'm saying is when the dean's visit to Mumbai, we invited all the School of Public Health. And I saw these young people, young girls and boys, all starting their own companies. One was starting a company was on mobile health, on mobile phones, directing a health. Somebody else was working in Tashkent and Kazakhstan. Another person was working in Assam. And oh my God, these people were young and they were raring to go, who were doing businesses, young businesses, which they started. They got even venture funding and all kinds of things. And to me, that was a signal saying that the hope of the future really is in young people who are themselves entrepreneurs. And I think they will actually be much more efficient at changing the world than being in a government, because they are slow, bureaucratic, long-term. They really don't take decisions quickly. And I think really this may be the hope for the future. So how did you get the courage to break out of the mold? I think those of us who are brought up in India, they're always inspired by Mahatma Gandhi. And here was this young man who was with funny shaped ears, who would even wear like lungis, you know, to meet the King of England. And he had this force of personality, and he would say that be the force that you want your country to be. And I thought that was, you know, that line kind of resonated. And I said, if I want my country to be like this, I have to live like that. Because I can't just say that the government is smart. That's my favorite line. And say that, okay, they will think about everything of the future and they will somehow do it. But you have to guide them. You have to create that force. You have to make your country what you want to be. And that courage, I think, entirely came from Gandhian teachings of learning. And anyone who has time should read that book. And the second, I think, is the Bhagavad Gita. It has amazing lessons on the philosophy of life, how you should act without thinking about the result, how you should always do the best in the world so other people can follow, about rising above a morass of corruption, greed, lust, hate, and making something which is pure and beautiful like a lotus. I think those are the lessons that I learned a lot from. I use it practically. If you come to our office, you see artwork, a sculpture actually depicting all those ideas. And honestly, those have really helped me to go be very focused on what we can achieve. And despite everybody else saying it's not possible. So dreaming the impossible dream is something I learned here.
That's very nice. Let me open it up for questions from the whole audience, especially our students who I hope will find great inspiration from Swati's story and her own personal journey after she graduated from this very school. And any questions, comments, please.
Hi, my name is Jeff Fuhrer. I'm in the Healthcare Management and Policy Program, MPH. And I'm sure that when you left the Harvard School of Public Health and you went back to India, you were expecting many, many challenges, and it sounded like there were many challenges and you overcame them. I was wondering if you could talk to some challenges that you weren't expecting, one or two things along the way that kind of surprised you, and how did you deal with the challenges that you weren't expecting, the things that surprised you?
I think the biggest thing which I probably didn't learn straight up, but it was subliminal, how do you deal with failure? And you know, in the drug discovery area, it's a very risky business. Out of 100, 99 times you might fail and one you may succeed. And the naysayers are there in abundance in whatever you're doing. And somehow, how do you develop that will and the confidence to overcome that hurdle? I thought it would be easy. It wasn't. I got thrown out of many associations who didn't like the way I thought about Indian science, that I thought that we could invent something, that we could. They said, we can't. We just have to be copies of the West, and that's a better way and a cheaper way of doing things. And I would say, no, I really believe that the answers to our healthcare problems aren't going to come from the West. Who's going to figure out what kind of tuberculosis we have, or what kind of HIV virus really affects the large people in my country? And I didn't expect to even deal with those questions, but I think I faced it. And I said, this is something that we have to really believe in yourself to overcome.
Other questions?
See, when I was at the Harvard Business School, 30% of your marks were if you put your hand up. It was not part of our school now, is it? I don't know, but it was enormously difficult. I thought there were these smart-talking Harvard lawyers and business guys who were like 6 feet tall, and I was this little Asian woman. I didn't even know I was not supposed to sit in the first row.
Please.
Yeah.
I'm Sophia Pennick, and I'm also one of the co-founders of Women in Leadership, so thank you very much for coming. My question is really about, you talk a lot about the philosophies that inform your decisions, and I was wondering if you can talk about how do you push those forward to the people that you work with and create that strong culture of service and devotion in everything that people do when they work in your company or with other groups that you work with.
Yeah, sometimes it's very simple things. I remember I was running this for polio-affected children, and I noticed that all the doctors would not touch the child. They would just write a prescription. And so I kind of said, we have to create the idea of seva, the idea of warmth. And that year, a very beautiful lady walked into my clinic. Her name was Mother Teresa. She was wearing this white sari with a blue border. And because there were so many handicapped kids, she came there. And I realized, just looking at her and the first thing she did, before even asking anyone's name, she would pick up the child. And I said, well, that's what we've got to do. So I trained my doctors to pick up the child, give them a hug, and then treat them. And we became known for that, because it wasn't done anywhere. Sometimes very simple things. Then I did a study on how long people would wait in the clinic. So, doctors are used to long queues. And I said, well, that's unethical, because these people are taking a day off from work to sit in your clinic, and they're losing money which they could have got from work. So I did a measurement. It would be maybe 5 hours, 6 hours, and then we rejigged everything, the whole scheduling and everything, but they had to wait only 10 minutes. So it was sometimes very simple things, but showed that you care. And I'll tell you, the number of people who came to our clinic compared to all the other little clinics was tremendous, because they felt here's a place where people like the idea of care. Sometimes it is in a strong defense of what you believe in. One day there was CNN did a little breaking news on one of our drugs, which was used for saving lives. It was a plasma expander. And the news said that, well, there's this company, Piramal Healthcare, and it is a killer, and it is taking this, and it's killing thousands of people, and nobody should buy this drug. And I was surprised. I said, a company which believes in all these things, and you're saying it's a killer? And I said, no, I'm going to go talk to them. And of course, it didn't help. Finally, I said, I'll take them to court and show them all the data which shows that this is a very safe product, which actually helps people when they are dying. It helps them to survive. So I go armed with a leading doctor who's a Padma Bhushan doctor who's advising the Prime Minister. And I take him with me, and I go to the CNN, and I said, this is it. And I said, people said, you can't sue CNN. It's a world's biggest, media company. And even if you sue them, it's going to take you 15 years. So I said no. But anyway, first time in my life I go to a court and I, filed a complaint. The editor of CNN came to see me and he said, I'm very sorry. And I said, but no, 1 minute. Sorry doesn't help. Because I said, why don't you let this doctor who's Padma Vibhushan to get onto that studio and let him talk about the safety, and I'll be happy with that. And that's what happened. So the defense of what you believe in is as important as just saying, yeah, this is a good theory. So when you have put these three values, and every employee of mine realized that we were fighting for that, for the idea of seva, the idea of the correct ethical values. And I think that they understood that we were taking on something which was larger than us, but we really believed in it. And I think it translated down to every single person who worked with us, whether it was doctors or patients. Sometimes life gives you those opportunities or challenges by which you can actually use a torchlight to show the way.
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Subhadha and I am also pursuing MPH here in management field. Thank you very much for coming here, and it was really very inspiring to hear from you. The story you told about the little girl having polio and that triggered you to do something about it for the country. I would like to know a little bit more about what were the resources you made use of, and what were the barriers you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. I was walking on this road, and it happens that the area where this happened is full of migrant workers. They work in the mill, the cotton textile industry, which is one of India's large industries. And because they were migrant, they were traveling a place which was not endemic for polio. They were coming to in a zone which was endemic for polio. And the children were getting this. But they thought that there were a demon inside. And they didn't know it was all about a virus and that it could be prevented. And if someone told them they would take one vaccine, but they wouldn't finish the whole course. So these were the two big issues. One was compliance. The second was lack of awareness on what was really going on. So I said, if we can do these two. So I was only a student, so I had no idea. I had no idea of resources or stuff. So I called my people who are medical students, and I told them, I said, let's do these skits in this region about how it's not a Devi, it is really a virus. So we did that. So that helped. But the real thing that helped was I figured that if you could give them a little present after they finished all the 3 doses, they would comply more. But how to get the present and what could it be? So I rang my father-in-law, who incidentally happened to be running a textile mill. And I said, would you donate 10,000 meters of cloth? Now we make 1 million meters of cloth a day. So I chose the most striped cloth that I could find, most colorful one. And I would give a mother who came after she finished 2 meters of the cloth, the plain cloth, right? And that would cost 10 rupees, something like that. At the end of that year, there were these little children full of striped waistcoats all on the road, little frocks and little things. And I said, it's working. So it's innovation, because the price was not high, but it was the idea. And in Hindi we say idea ki keemat hai. So it was my first taste of about incentives for compliance. And I figured this works. And then because mothers knew they were comfortable with what we were doing, we immunized about maybe 100,000 kids every year. So at the end of 10 years, we did not need to run a rehabilitation center. A little crutch where we made children who were paralyzed, we threw it all away. So it was a very nice story where an endemic area, migrant workers, lack of awareness, with very little resource, we could capture that district. Then of course it became a national polio program, so we didn't have to do that. But they're very simple things that you can do. Now osteoporosis is another example where most of the women in India have osteoporosis. Nobody had heard of the word before. So I said, how do you tell people that have to sit in a place of sunshine, you must sit outside. They said, no, we'll get darker and stuff like that. We don't want to sit in the sunshine. So I started a program called O-Stop, and it was just a very simple postcard which cost 15 paisa, which told people about osteoporosis and how to stop it. And it was a very successful program with a very low cost. So I think using innovation, using low-cost methods, using awareness, communication was a skill I learned here at the School of Public Health. We had Tony Schwartz. He was a communication chief of President Lyndon Johnson, or was it must be Bush, George Bush the senior. And he used to be part of that presidential campaign. And he taught about 20 students about how to communicate in healthcare. And I thought it was one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned. So I came back and used all those lessons. So moral of the story, everything that you learn works.
But we just heard that Swati is the inventor of the conditional cash transfers for health, right? Because that's an early expression of conditional cloth transfers. So we will have a new case of public policy intervention. You had asked for the floor. You need the mic because we're recording.
My name is Shalu Puri, and I've taken a mid-career decision to do an MPH now after having worked for many years, my last job being with the World Economic Forum. My question was more related to, more specific to India. And I'm sure a lot of Indians share this thought about the paradoxical women's status in India, where we actually have women leaders even at the community level now, but there are many who have the courage, who have the intent, but cannot somehow seem to get the right opportunities. Do you have any comments on that? How do we get more women to be leaders? General comments on that, not really a question.
Yeah, so my metaphor of Prince Arjun and the bow and arrow was really directed towards a large number of women, because we really believe we can't do it. And we are beset with difficulties. We have children to raise, we have to make them study, life is becoming too difficult in schools, and then we have careers, and we have to juggle everything. And really, who has the time to bother about changing the world or making a policy or going to the government and saying this policy is wrong, how can we get more mothers inside hospitals so that they can deliver and it can reduce maternal mortality? We don't have the time for that. But the metaphor of karma, of action, to me is a very powerful motive to tell people that you can actually change things. And having mentors and having role models gives them a very powerful drive. When I started my research facility, like the school, I had only 10% women. But I created the ambience of a woman-friendly place. There were very simple things that we did. We had no pornography was allowed on computers, no bad speech, no way of disrespect to women who had scientific ability. And if they had children, we would allow them to go home and do work from home even, file patents from home. And so we kind of did this whole thing. Today we have more than 50% who are women. So companies who are getting value from women, who are 50% of the population, the economic potential of those companies really create economic value. I think as employees, women are wonderful. They are very loyal to you. They don't go for another job very quickly. They kind of focus, they're very focused on achieving. They're very sincere about learning. And so I think those attributes really help. So again, I would just tell them to remember the lesson of the Gita, where it says, take action.
And an important point here is, we in many places we've achieved educational equality of educational opportunity that doesn't always translate into occupational opportunity. And we're proud that now 60% of our graduates are women, but the next step is exactly to create the workplace policies, including sometimes policies directed at men. our other distinguished alumna that I mentioned, Gro Brundtland, as Prime Minister, introduced paternal leave. Because by allowing men to take leave to take care of their children, they also freed up women to actually go and work. And it's the idea that it's very often we're very focused on educational opportunity, which is obviously unnecessary, but it's not a sufficient condition. It's when you get to occupational opportunity. And the health field is particularly prone to still a huge amount of gender stratification, even though the majority of health professionals in the world are already women. That's why it's great that our students have developed this idea of women in leadership and that we have the opportunity to see some of these role models. We're getting to the end. We probably have time for one more question before we wrap up, so please.
Hello, thank you. My question was, I want to know how prevalent is the idea of seva amongst other private sector companies in India, those working in hospitals and pharmaceuticals?
I think it's there subliminally, but I don't think it's there as a value. And people don't understand that it actually creates economic value. Values create value, I think. That's just my theory. But if you can figure out cultures which help the idea of seva, I think it gives you such a strong brand name. And people are willing to pay for that very high standard of ethics. I mentioned Abbott paid us $3.8 billion, which is one of the highest values paid for a generic business in the world. And they told us later that it was because of this high standard of ethics that we had created in our people, in our way we did business, in the idea of service. They actually even wanted to keep our name. So I think it creates economic value. And that, I think, is poorly understood. But I was surprised to find that the HPS tomorrow where I'm going is in the board statement. They call it different names, but it's exactly the three. It's principles, purpose, and a higher cause or something like that. They use it. But it's very similar. And so this idea of Gyan Karma Bhakti can be put into action and can create economic value.
We have a very last question before we wrap up.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to thank you so much for coming here and talking about, women and leadership issues. You really are a fabulous example. I was just curious, with the changes in mass media and social media, how do you view your role as a female leader and role model in India? How has it evolved since kind of the influence of that?
So very quickly, we started the HSPH Facebook India community page last week. I realized these young kids, I better figure out how this works and learn. And I found it was the most powerful tool to get, we're talking about the taxation on tobacco in different states. We're talking about the prevalence of bird flu and all kinds of things on the Facebook page. It really works. So social media helps. I see that I have to wrap up. So again, I'd like to remind everybody that this school is one of the best schools ever in the world. It's an experience that you are so privileged to have, that every lesson that you learn, you will take back with you and really change the world, reduce the burden of disease somewhere, sometime. And I wouldn't be any other place in the world than here, so you're so lucky. And if you could take some of these ideas, these values, because they're eternal, the idea of knowledge, the idea of perseverance, the idea of courage, the idea of actually acting to make sure that knowledge is translated into reality, because that really makes a difference to people. And the idea ultimately of having a higher purpose, of having this idea of seva, the idea of service, because those three will make you very strong. It will create an institution which can rise above a morass of inequity, of really the wrong things, of the way of hatred, the way of jealousy, of all kinds of things which really make up a large people who don't get what they are supposed to get, and really create the standard of excellence, a place, an institution, a company, yourself, creating this white lotus which comes out of the mucky sand and really create something so beautiful and something of great value.
I want to thank Swati Piramal for this truly inspirational Voices from the Field session. It's for us, I mean, who are here at the Harvard School of Public Health, a source of great pride to welcome you back here and see everything you've done. I take, two ideas. First, this notion that you can create economic value with values. The idea that we need ideas, but also ideals, and that it's the mix of that actually eventually ends up producing the value. And how that creates the moral authority to then also influence public policy and close that gap that we have had, that here's the public, here's the private, and actually use that kind of moral authority that comes from ideas and ideals. Good ideas, but also a firm ethical basis. The other point that I think you mentioned a couple of times is how we need to build institutions. And it's when you bring those values, the knowledge, the action, the values, into an institutional setting that we actually transcend, because institutions are the instrument that we humans have developed to deal with our own temporal nature in Earth. It's the way we transcend. We're very proud that this institution will be celebrated 100 years next year. And it's exactly individuals like you who have made it the great school it is. So I want to thank you again for having come and shared all of this great inspiration. Thank you, Swati.